Watching a kilo of molten silver turn to solid is a mesmerising sight, and in today's video we're showcasing 4 of them in a silver casting ride-along. Hello everybody, Backyard Bullion here, and thanks for joining me for another silver pouring ride-along, or I should say silver casting ride-along, as today we're going to be focusing on these 1 kilo silver cast Rolo rounds. That's nearly as much fun to say as it is to play with these absolutely incredibly cool pieces. Hammered to within an inch of their lives, over 2,500 hammer strokes per kilo Rolo. They are pretty cool and I'm very proud of them. Now, we unveiled them in a video earlier this week where all 5 of them were there, and a lot of people were asking about them and how they could get hold of them and how they were made. So in today's video we are going to talk about that, showcasing the casting process. Not really going to show the hammering process. That's kind of relatively simple. You just take a ball hammer and go to ham on it, really. It's 2,500 odd hammer strokes per kilo, so there's nearly 10,000 hammer strokes here. Not quite so fun for my next door neighbour, I can imagine, but it's really quite a cathartic process to go through. But the main interest for me is in the casting of these Rolos themselves, because it's very different to poured silver. So we are going to head over to the silver casting bench, not the silver pouring bench, in a moment and have a look at that. Before we do, I do want to just apologise for the lighting on the table segments of today's video. It's basically the end of the world as it comes to weather here in the UK today, with monsoon rain and just yucky light. So do apologise for that. Well, let's head over to the casting bench and we can have a look at these kilo Rolos coming into their own. So here we are over at the pouring bench, or as I should say, the casting bench, because there is a distinct difference between poured silver and cast silver. Now with poured silver, the clue's in the name. You take this big chunky graphite crucible of silver and you pour it into a mold, and then it would take the shape as it cooled and solidified. But with cast silver, you are just leaving it in situ to cool naturally. And I absolutely love this process. It's quite mesmerizing, and it's really interesting from a kind of physical science point of view as well. You'll see that things start to cool from the outside in. The middle of that molten pool of silver is going to retain its heat longer, which is slightly interesting because the graphite crucible itself, you can see, is still glowing, and that's where a lot of the heat is. But because of the air around and just the general temperature around that graphite crucible, it's the outside that cools first. The inside is insulated. Now you can see it cooling here from the outside in, and you get these absolutely awesome looking patterns, but they're not actually that aesthetic. They are very dramatic and it looks really cool, but for me it's always about tidying this kind of thing up and making it into those hammered finishes. Of course, a natural finish bar or round is definitely possible, but for me it's more about that final finish that we get once we've hammered it. So that's the first one done. We're going to have a look now at some of the others, because whilst they are, you know, essentially the same process each time, you do get different looks and feels and different speeds of cooling, and the temperature at which you take the crucible out of the furnace definitely makes a difference. The amount of time that it takes for these things to cool, and of course that's going to be longer if you have a higher starting temperature, is, I think, really interesting. Now when it's in its molten form here, it's magical. Look at that, it's just glorious, and of course it would be wonderful if you could just freeze it like that, freeze it in time, and it would be a perfect domed bubble of silver. But because of the slow cooling process, it does take an awful long time to get from liquid to solid. This dome that happens from the surface tension of the silver, the meniscus so to speak, it actually ends up concaving down and collapsing down as the silver solidifies on the outside first in this higher profile. It sucks the silver up and out to the edges as it cools, which means you get this concave look and finish to it, which is really cool, don't get me wrong, but as I will explain in a moment, it's an absolute pig to stamp onto these pieces. Now this one is one of my favorites to watch the video. It really is incredibly cool and dramatic, and just the way it looks is phenomenal. You can see there's a few little imperfections, and really interestingly you see these little bits bubbling at the sides. Those are basically graphite pollutants. That's where the graphite crucible itself has started to degrade and graphite dust has got onto the silver, with the graphite dust being a lot lighter than the actual silver itself. it floats to the surface and then bubbles up right at the end as it cools. It's really quite an interesting process. Now you have to excuse this one, I did cut off the top of it as I was filming, the angle wasn't quite right, but as again we'll see this in real time as it cools from liquid to solid. Again, I just absolutely love the reflectiveness of this molten silver, and of course it would be wonderful to keep it looking like that, but gosh, I guess you'd need to freeze it almost instantly, and let me tell you, 1,000+ degrees silver is almost impossible to cool down this fast. It's just not going to happen. One thing that is always interesting though is observing what you do and see if there's any difference in the way that it works and the results that you get at the other end. So that's part of the reason I always film these and try to examine what's happening in terms of the processes. Do apologise for it not being quite in focus on this. The amount of heat, by the way, that's being blasted out from these crucibles and these molten kilos is staggering. It really is. Now with these, when they are set, when they are solid, I actually leave them in situ to cool completely down. I don't try and tip them out. Part of that is, now of course you are looking at it cooling from the outside in, which is again the same principle. It will cool from the outside in from the top as well. So even though it looks like it's solidified, there's still, in my head anyway, some chance that it is liquid in the middle. And if you were to look to tip it out, you know, at that final moment when it's cooled and it looks like it's all okay, it could potentially not be. Like, you could breach the surface and tension and the inner bits could still be liquid and molten silver goes everywhere, which is not what you want to achieve. So for me, for my process, for how we run this, I will leave it in situ for a few hours until it's really kind of cooled down to room temperature, and then it comes out the graphite mold really nice and easily. This is the last one now that we filmed, and again the process is very, very similar, and I wanted to keep all of these four in real time just to show you it really is a very slow process of cooling. Now I do want to experiment with this at some point, and I do want to potentially leave the tongs attached to it and sort of maybe rock it back and forward to see if we can get some really interesting patterns and ripples. People have also suggested, why don't you have like a vibration plate underneath it to get these different ripples or have it spinning and turning. Definitely possible, but the prospect of a kilo of molten silver flying everywhere in the room is obviously not ideal. And the graphite crucibles are very good, very thick, but they do have limited number of uses in them that are safe, especially when you're taking it out and letting it cool like this over and over again. So from my perspective, it's an interesting idea, but one that maybe we'll explore at another time. So that's the casting process. We're now going to talk a little bit more about the stamping. So that's the whole casting process. It's a really interesting one, and I think it's quite cool. Like, it's mesmerising. That's just how I see it, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it too. Now, as I said earlier in the video, there's over 2,500 hammer strokes on each of these Kilo Rolo rounds, so it takes an awful long time. I think it's something like 30 minutes worth of work per piece just to get the hammer strokes on, and then it's of course getting all of the different little bits on, like the BYB. And I wanted to talk about the BYB part of it, the stamp, because as you may have seen from the casting videos, the first one that we made, which I didn't actually have videoed, it's a relatively shallow pool. It's still quite a decent kind of, you know, contour. It's very nice indeed, but it was a breeze to stamp the BYB logo. And in fact, I've stamped that BYB logo on deeper cooling pools before without issue. But when the other four came out, you can see, and I have a suspicion this is because they were at a higher temperature when they came out of the furnace compared with this one. It obviously took longer for them to cool, so we had deeper cooling pools, and I mean, they really are incredibly deep, absolutely mad. Now, unfortunately, that comes with some negative benefits as well as positive coolness, because stamping the BYB logo down in there is a lot more difficult because you have to get it a lot deeper to get the definition of the B, the Y, and the B. And as you can see, the difference in the border is the biggest thing there. Now, I really like this. I think it looks fantastic, but it did come at a bit of a price because my BYB stamp sadly broke. Now, that is absolutely no reflection on the quality of the stamp from M. Shaw Engraving, which I would highly recommend to anybody who's looking to get stamps suitable for metal stamping. These stamps are really good. It was simply down to my own zealousness to get as much detail as possible, and As I was stamping this, I was trying different angles to get the depth in, to get obviously the B and the Y and the B all done. And as I was trying at the top here to get it all in, unfortunately I bent and then subsequently snapped the border of my stamp, which was a bit of an oh no moment. It was like, what have I done? How did I do that? And when I did it, I was a little bit annoyed with myself because I knew that it was going to be a tough stamp to get this done, and unfortunately I just I pushed it too far. Fortunately, this was the last one that I was stamping. I'd already done the others, otherwise it would have been a bit of a wait for the new stamp. And in fact, when I rang up the stamp makers M-Shaw Engraving to say, I've broken my stamp, can I have a new one please? They just asked me, what on earth have you done to break it? And I just, well, the border's broken and bent and snapped. You can see that it looks bent there, but actually there was a piece of steel stuck in the silver which I had to pry out before sending up to assay and getting these laser hallmarks. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But yeah, it was one of those things, really annoying that I did it. But the stamp makers M-Shaw Engraving gave me some great tips for the future. Of course, the angles of which you stamp is important, but also keeping your stamp in good condition and clean. And you can see here there's quite a lot of kind of detritus in between the letters there. And there was actually a little bit more around the borders, which I have subsequently cleaned out since that stamp broke. But getting a sort of brass wire brush or something like that just to clean the innards of the stamp, because the silver particles that are transferred and left in there and just the general gunk and dirt and grime, it does have an effect, and it can sometimes push the steel in different directions. And ultimately it's steel and it's really hard and it's very well made, but it is a very thin border that you can see there. And when you're going that far deep with the amount of pressure that I was putting on it, it's it's fairly likely that it goes. Now, as I said, I'm not going to in any way say that these stamps are less than good, because this particular one has been with me for, gosh, 3 and a bit years now, and it's had probably, I'd say, close to 5,000, maybe I would imagine more, 5,000 actual pieces put through it, but equally as many hammer strokes on top of that as well. So I'd say there's like 10,000 hammer strokes or more that have gone through this, this stamp without issue, without error. So, very, very good stamp makers, but human error, user error, bit annoying. So lesson learned, that's part of life. You get on with life, and you just you have to kind of roll with the punches sometimes. So new stamp on the way. Hopefully that'll come very soon, and we'll be back to making BYB branded things. Now, the last thing to talk about is the assay testing. So with all of my big kilo pieces, we have sent them up to the Edinburgh Assay Office for laser hallmarking. And I want to put a big shout out and thank you into the assay office here for their absolute exceptional work of getting these laser hallmarks done on a non-even surface that's hammered as well as contoured. It's really quite impressive, the amount of detail that these laser hallmarks can get, and I just love the fact that it preserves some of the hammered texture, and that the BYB there is over that contour, but it's still really nice. So a big thank you to the techs up in the laser team there in the Edinburgh Assay office. It's a really interesting process and a fascinating one to sort of see how it works in real life, which I have done, but also just to see how it turns out practically on the silver. So really, really pretty. Absolutely love them. They are wonderful. Not cheap, but they are absolutely wonderful. And I think it makes the piece, it makes it better. And you want that for a big kilo sort of piece of silver that you've got. So that's basically it for today's video on these Kilo Rolos. If you are interested in a Kilo Rolo round, then we will be able to make some more to order. We are not making these to have for sale on our website. They are obviously expensive pieces to make, let alone in terms of time and energy and effort, but the laser hallmarking and other equipment costs as well. So to keep our kind of overall turnover lower, we would be looking at a melt service. So in other words, you would send me a kilo of silver and then we'd melt it and charge you a fee. So if you are interested in getting one of these Kilo Rolo rounds, you can think of it as a bit of an upgrade to some of your scratched, milky, horrible silver. So let me know if you are interested. My email is down in the description box below. You can get hold of me there, or just drop me a comment and we can link up. Or over on the Silver Forum, I'm usually over there pretty much every day, and you can get hold of me and contact me there. So that's it. Otherwise, have a fantastic week ahead. Quick reminder, as usual, if you've enjoyed this video, please put a thumbs up on it and share it around on your social media. That would be very helpful for everything that we do here on the channel. And any feedback on these kind of commentary style videos is always very helpful for us to develop and keep on going. Do you prefer just seeing it with some nice music in the background, or do you enjoy the actual commentary? Do you think it adds to it, detracts from it? Would you like a bit more of this kind of content? Let me know. I'd be very appreciative of the feedback. Otherwise, have a fantastic week ahead. We'll see you on the next one. And as always, please make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.